The phone call came from my sister Ruth in Memphis at 9:47 in the morning on a Tuesday in March. I was sitting in my small apartment in Atlanta, eating my breakfast of oatmeal and coffee, when her name flashed on my caller ID. I smiled, thinking she was just calling for our weekly chat, but when I answered, she was sobbing so hard I could barely understand her. "Ruth, baby sister, what's wrong? What happened?" "Leon," she choked out between sobs. "Leon, I thought you were dead. I've been grieving you for 3 weeks and you're alive." "You're alive!" The oatmeal spoon fell from my hand and clattered on the table. "Dead? Ruth, what are you talking about? I'm right here. I'm fine. Kenneth told us you died. He called 3 weeks ago, said you'd had a massive heart attack, that you died in your sleep, that you'd already been cremated because that's what you wanted. We've been planning a memorial service. The whole family has been grieving. And you're alive." The world tilted sideways. Kenneth, my son, my only child, the boy I had raised alone after his mother left us when he was 5 years old. My son had told my entire family that I was dead. "Ruth, I need you to tell me exactly what Kenneth said." Through her tears, she told me the whole story. Kenneth had called her 3 weeks ago, his voice supposedly broken with grief, and told her that I had died suddenly of a heart attack. He said he had found me in my apartment, that the paramedics couldn't revive me, that I had been cremated according to my wishes. He said he was too devastated to talk much, that he would let her know about memorial arrangements, and then he had hung up. Ruth had called our other siblings, our brother Marcus in Chicago, our sister Dorothy in Detroit, our youngest brother James in Houston. They had all been grieving for me for 3 weeks. They had told extended family, friends from our childhood, people from our old neighborhood. The whole family had been mourning me while I sat in my apartment, very much alive, completely unaware. "But why?" Ruth kept asking. "Why would Kenneth do this? Why would he tell us you were dead?" I didn't have an answer for her then, but I would find out. And when I did, the betrayal would cut deeper than anything I had experienced in my 76 years of life. My name is Leon Washington. I'm 76 years old, and what I'm about to tell you is a story about betrayal so cruel it defies comprehension, and justice so perfect it proved that God's timing is always right even when we can't see it. But to understand how my son could tell everyone I was dead just to avoid his responsibilities to me, you need to know the whole story. You need to know about the 50 years of sacrifice I made for him, the life I built for us, and the man he became despite everything I tried to teach him. I was born in 1948 in Memphis, Tennessee, the oldest of 5 children in a family that knew poverty intimately. My father worked at the cotton processing plant when there was work, and my mother took in laundry from white families, washing their clothes by hand in a big tin tub in our backyard. We lived in a 3-room shotgun house in South Memphis where you could see through the cracks in the walls and the roof leaked every time it rained. But my parents were proud people, strong people who taught us that being poor didn't mean being worthless. "You got 2 things that don't cost nothing," my daddy used to say. "Your word and your character. You keep both of them clean and you'll be somebody, no matter how much money you got." I took those words to heart. I worked hard in school, got good grades despite having to share one textbook between 3 of us children. I graduated high school in 1966 near the top of my class, and I got a job at the post office sorting mail at night so I could help my parents with the younger kids. In 1968, I met Dorothy Freeman at a church social. She was 20 years old, beautiful, with a smile that made me forget every trouble I had. We dated for a year, got married in 1969 in a simple ceremony at her family's church. I wore a borrowed suit. She wore her mother's wedding dress altered to fit, and we were as happy as 2 people could be. We moved to Atlanta in 1970 because I had gotten a better job at the main post office there, working my way up from mail sorter to supervisor. Dorothy got a job as a secretary at an insurance company. We rented a small apartment in the West End, saved every penny we could, dreamed about buying our own house one day. Kenneth was born in 1972, and I thought my life was complete. I held my son in the hospital and I made promises to him and to God. This boy would have a better life than I had. He would never know real hunger, never sleep in a cold house, never feel the shame of wearing shoes with holes in them. I would work myself into the ground if that's what it took. Dorothy and I were good parents, I thought. We both worked hard, but we made time for Kenneth. I coached his little league team even though I had never played baseball. Dorothy helped with his homework every night. We went to every school event, every parent-teacher conference. We were present, involved, loving. But Dorothy wasn't happy. I didn't see it at first, or maybe I didn't want to see it. She started staying late at work, going out with friends on weekends, being distant when she was home. In 1977, when Kenneth was 5 years old, Dorothy told me she was leaving. "I'm not cut out for this," she said, packing her suitcase while Kenneth played in his room, unaware his world was about to shatter. Being a wife, being a mother, living this small life in this small apartment. I want more. I deserve more. We all want more, Dorothy. But we have a son. We have responsibilities. You have responsibilities. I'm done. She left that night, moved in with a man she had been seeing, a manager at her company who had money and drove a nice car and took her to fancy restaurants. She filed for divorce, signed away her parental rights without a fight, and disappeared from Kenneth's life like she had never been there at all. Kenneth cried for his mama every night for months. Where did mama go? Why doesn't she love me anymore? Did I do something bad? I held my 5-year-old son while he sobbed, and I tried to explain something I didn't understand myself. How do you tell a child that his mother chose her own happiness over him? How do you make that make sense? I became a single father at 29 years old. I worked full-time at the post office, came home and cooked dinner, helped with homework, did laundry, cleaned house, tucked Kenneth in every night, and then stayed up late doing it all over again to prepare for the next day. My family helped when they could. Ruth would come from Memphis sometimes to stay with Kenneth when I had to work overtime. Marcus sent money when he could spare it. But mostly it was just me and Kenneth against the world, figuring it out as we went. I made sure Kenneth had everything he needed. New shoes when his feet grew, clothes that fit, school supplies, birthday parties with cake and presents. When his class went on field trips, I made sure Kenneth went. When there were school fundraisers, I made sure Kenneth could participate. I worked overtime whenever I could, took extra shifts, did whatever it took to provide for my son. I wanted him to know he was loved, that even though his mother had left, he had a father who would never abandon him, who would always be there. Kenneth was a good student, smart like his mother had been, though I never said that out loud. He got good grades, stayed out of trouble mostly, had friends. But there was something in him, something I couldn't quite identify. A coldness sometimes, a lack of empathy that worried me. When he was 10, he found a stray dog in our neighborhood, a skinny mutt that was clearly starving. Kenneth brought it home, and I thought it showed he had a good heart, that he cared about animals. We fed it, gave it water, and I said we could keep it if Kenneth took care of it. 2 weeks later, I found out Kenneth had been tying the dog up in our small backyard all day in the hot sun with no water. To teach it to be tough, he said. When I confronted him, he showed no remorse, just annoyance that I was upset. It's just a dog, Dad. Why are you making such a big deal about it? Because how you treat something that can't fight back shows who you are. That dog depends on you. You don't hurt things that depend on you. He looked at me with eyes that seemed older than 10 years, calculating. Okay, Dad, I understand. I'm sorry. But I don't think he was sorry. I think he was just sorry he got caught. There were other incidents over the years. Kenneth was smart enough to hide most of his behavior, but I caught glimpses. The way he manipulated other kids to get what he wanted. The way he lied so smoothly that sometimes even I believed him. The way he seemed to lack genuine emotion, just performed the emotions he thought people wanted to see. But he was my son, and I loved him, and I told myself he would grow out of it. That teenage years were hard for everyone. That once he matured, he would become the man I was raising him to be. Kenneth graduated high school in 1990 with good grades and a scholarship to Georgia State University. I was so proud I thought I would burst. My son going to college. The first person in our family to go to college. Everything I had worked for was paying off. I helped him move into the dorms, paid for his books, sent him money every month for food and expenses even though it meant I went without things I needed. Kenneth was building his future, and that's all that mattered. But Kenneth changed in college. He started dating a girl named Melissa from a wealthy family in Buckhead. And suddenly he was embarrassed by me. By my old car, my modest apartment, my postal worker's uniform. When I visited campus, he would meet me away from his dorm. Didn't want his friends to see me. "Dad, it's not that I'm ashamed of you," he said when I confronted him. These people come from different worlds. They wouldn't understand." "Understand what? That your father works for a living? That he sacrificed everything to put you through school? It's not like that. You're making it a bigger deal than it is." But it was that big of a deal to me. My son was learning to be ashamed of where he came from, of who raised him, of the sacrifices that made his college education possible. Kenneth graduated in 1994 with a business degree and got a job at a marketing firm. He started making decent money, moved into a nice apartment in Midtown, started dressing in expensive clothes and driving a car that cost more than I made in a year. Melissa and Kenneth got married in 1996, and the wedding was the first time I really understood how far my son had drifted from his raising. It was a big fancy affair at some country club in Buckhead, with 300 guests and flowers that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Melissa's family paid for most of it, but Kenneth paid for his share with money I had given him over the years for emergencies. I was seated at a table in the back, away from Melissa's family and Kenneth's new corporate friends. When people asked who I was, Kenneth introduced me as Leon, from the post office, not as his father, not as the man who raised him alone, just Leon from the post office. During his speech, Kenneth thanked Melissa's parents for their generosity and support. He thanked his college friends for their friendship. He thanked his boss for believing in him. He never mentioned me. Never thanked the man who had worked 2 jobs to put him through school, who had sacrificed everything to give him opportunities. I sat at that table in the back of that fancy country club, wearing a suit I had bought at a discount store, and I felt invisible. My son had erased me from his own narrative, rewritten his story to exclude the poor postal worker father who didn't fit the image he was trying to project. After the wedding, I saw Kenneth maybe 3 or 4 times a year. Always brief visits, always with Melissa hovering and making comments about how quaint my neighborhood was or how interesting my apartment looked. Kenneth would sit stiffly, checking his watch, clearly wanting to leave as soon as possible. "Dad, we should do this more often," he would say as he was leaving, but we both knew it was a lie. In 2000, they had their first child, my grandson Andrew. I was so excited to meet him, to be a grandfather, to have family again. I drove to the hospital as soon as Kenneth called, brought a teddy bear I had bought, ready to welcome my grandson into the world. But when I got to the hospital room, it was full of Melissa's family. Her parents, her siblings, her aunts and uncles. There was barely room for me. I stood in the corner for 20 minutes while Melissa's family passed the baby around, cooing and taking pictures. Finally, Kenneth noticed me. "Oh, Dad's here. Dad, come meet Andrew." He handed me the baby for maybe 2 minutes before Melissa's mother wanted him back. 2 minutes with my grandson, surrounded by strangers who barely acknowledged my existence. That set the pattern for the next 23 years. I was the grandfather they tolerated but didn't include. I was invited to birthday parties but always felt like an outsider. I sent Christmas gifts that were opened perfunctorily and set aside. I called to talk to Andrew, and Kenneth would put him on the phone briefly before taking it back. "Dad, he's busy with homework. We'll call you later." They never called later. In 2003, they had a second child, a daughter named Sarah. I went through the same experience at the hospital, tolerated but not welcomed, allowed to hold her briefly before being dismissed. I retired from the post office in 2010 after 40 years of service. They gave me a decent pension, enough to live on modestly. I downsized to a smaller one-bedroom apartment, sold my car and started taking the bus, cut expenses everywhere I could. Kenneth didn't come to my retirement party, said he had a work commitment he couldn't get out of, sent a card and a fruit basket instead. I was 62 years old, retired, living alone in a small apartment, and I started to realize how truly alone I was. My siblings were scattered across the country, all with their own families, their own lives. Kenneth was essentially a stranger who happened to share my DNA. I had no friends really, just acquaintances from work who drifted away after I retired. I started having health problems in my mid-60s. High blood pressure, diabetes, arthritis in my knees and hands. Nothing life-threatening but enough to make daily life difficult. I had to take multiple medications, go to doctor's appointments regularly, be careful about what I ate. I told Kenneth about my health issues, thinking maybe it would bring us closer, make him realize his father wasn't going to be around forever. "That's rough, Dad," he said on the phone, distracted. "Make sure you take your medications. Listen, I have to run." Meeting starting. No offer to help, no suggestion to visit, no indication he cared beyond the bare minimum acknowledgement. In 2015, I had a mild stroke. I was in the hospital for 4 days and Kenneth visited exactly once, stayed for 30 minutes, spent most of that time on his phone. Melissa didn't come at all. My grandchildren, who were now teenagers, didn't even know I was in the hospital. "Dad, I'm sorry I can't be here more," Kenneth said as he was leaving. "We're just really busy with work and the kids' activities. You understand." I understood that I wasn't a priority. I understood that unless I was providing something, money, favors, whatever, I was just an inconvenience. After the stroke, I had some lingering effects. My left hand didn't work quite right. I had some trouble with balance, needed a cane to walk safely. My doctor said I should have someone checking on me regularly, helping with groceries and medications, making sure I was okay. I asked Kenneth if he or Melissa could maybe stop by once a week, just to check on me, maybe help with grocery shopping. "Dad, we're 45 minutes away. That's a 90-minute round trip. With our schedules, it's just not feasible. Have you looked into hiring a home health aide? Or maybe it's time to think about assisted living." Assisted living. I was 67 years old, capable of taking care of myself mostly, just needed some occasional help. But to Kenneth, that was too much to ask. Better to suggest I move to a facility, get out of his hair completely. "Son, I'm not ready for assisted living. I just need some help once in a while." "Well, I don't know what to tell you, Dad. We have our own lives. You can't expect us to drop everything just because you're getting older." The man I had dropped everything for when he was 5 years old and his mother left. The boy I had worked 2 jobs for, sacrificed everything for, put through college. That man couldn't be bothered to visit his father once a week. I managed on my own. My neighbor Mrs. Chun, a widow in her 70s, started checking on me. We would have coffee sometimes, watch game shows together, keep each other company. She helped me with groceries when I was having a hard time, and I fixed things in her apartment when she needed help. Your son should be doing these things for you, Mrs. Chun said one day. Where is your family? Busy? I said, too ashamed to admit that my son had essentially abandoned me. In 2018, I fell in my apartment, slipped on a wet floor after my shower, hit my head on the bathroom counter, laid there for 3 hours before Mrs. Chun got worried when I didn't answer her knock and called the building manager to check on me. I was back in the hospital with a concussion and a broken wrist. Kenneth visited briefly again, seemed annoyed that I had inconvenienced him. Dad, you really need to be more careful. These falls are dangerous at your age. Have you thought about moving to a facility where there's staff to help you? I want to stay in my own home, Kenneth. Well, that's not really practical anymore, is it? You're becoming a liability. A liability. That's what I had become to my son. Not his father, not the man who raised him, just a liability. After that fall, I had to accept some help. I qualified for some limited home health services through Medicare, an aide who came 3 times a week to help with bathing and basic care. It was humiliating having a stranger help me with intimate tasks, but I didn't have a choice. Kenneth never offered to help. Never suggested he or Melissa could take turns checking on me. Never proposed that I move closer to them so they could be more involved. Just kept suggesting assisted living facilities, sending me brochures, pushing me to move somewhere, anywhere, as long as it meant he didn't have to deal with me. In 2020, during the pandemic, everything got worse. I was 72 years old with multiple health conditions, squarely in the high-risk category for COVID. I was terrified of getting sick, of dying alone in a hospital without family. Kenneth didn't call, didn't check on me, didn't offer to help with groceries or medications. I went 8 months without seeing him or hearing his voice. Just occasional texts. Staying safe? Good. Us too. Mrs. Chun and I isolated together, helping each other when we could while maintaining distance. She was the only family I had during that terrible time. When the vaccines came out in 2021, Kenneth finally called. Dad, make sure you get vaccinated. We don't want you getting sick. I already got my vaccine, Kenneth. Had both shots 3 weeks ago. Good. That's good. Listen, with vaccines rolling out, we're hoping to do some family gatherings again. But we need to know everyone is vaccinated. Can you send me proof of your vaccination? Why do you need proof? Because Melissa is concerned about safety. We're not letting anyone around the kids who can't prove they're vaccinated. I sent him my vaccination card. He never followed up about family gatherings. I was never invited. By 2022, I was 74 years old and struggling. My health continued to decline. The diabetes was getting harder to manage. My blood pressure was all over the place. The arthritis made it painful to move some days. I was on 8 different medications, had doctor appointments twice a month, needed help with more and more basic tasks. My home health aide, Maria, was wonderful, but she could only come 3 times a week for a few hours. The rest of the time I was on my own, struggling to cook meals, take showers, get dressed, all the things that used to be simple but now were challenges. I called Kenneth and asked if he could increase the frequency of his visits, maybe stop by once a month instead of once every few months. Dad, I don't have time for this conversation again. We've been over this. I have a demanding job, Melissa has her commitments, the kids have school and activities. We can't just drop everything to babysit you. I'm not asking you to babysit me. I'm asking you to visit your father occasionally. To be part of my life. I am part of your life. I call you every few weeks, don't I? 5-minute phone calls where you're clearly doing something else while we talk. What do you want from me, Dad? I've suggested assisted living a dozen times. There are nice places where you'd have help available 24/7, activities, other people your age. But you're too stubborn to consider it. I want my son to care about me. To act like I matter. That's not fair. I do care. I just can't drop my entire life to take care of you. You had your turn raising me. Now I have my own family to focus on. I raised you alone, Kenneth. Your mother left when you were 5, and I did it all by myself. I worked 2 jobs, sacrificed everything, and I never once complained about it or made you feel like a burden. Well, good for you. You want a medal? You did what parents are supposed to do. That doesn't mean I owe you my entire life now. The conversation ended badly, as most of our conversations did by then. I hung up feeling more alone than ever. In September 2023, I had another health scare. I woke up one morning with severe chest pains. Couldn't catch my breath. Thought I was having a heart attack. Mrs. Chun found me gasping for air and called 911. It turned out to be a severe panic attack brought on by stress and anxiety. Not a heart attack, but I spent 2 days in the hospital under observation. The doctors said I was depressed, prescribed antidepressants, recommended therapy, suggested I might benefit from more social interaction and family support. Kenneth didn't visit the hospital. Didn't even call. I left him a voicemail telling him I had been hospitalized, and he sent a text 3 days later. Heard you were in hospital. Glad you're okay. K. That was it. Glad you're okay. K. I sat in my apartment after being discharged, looking at that text message, and something inside me just broke. I cried for hours, sobbed until I had no tears left, grieved for the relationship I had never had with my son, for the grandchildren who didn't know me, for the family I had dreamed of but never got. Mrs. Chun found me that evening, still crying, and she sat with me, held my hand. Let me talk. He doesn't love me, I said. My own son doesn't love me. I'm just a burden he's waiting to be rid of. Then he's a fool, Mrs. Chun said fiercely. You are a good man, kind man. He doesn't deserve you. But that didn't make it hurt less. In December 2023, Kenneth called with a proposal. Dad, Melissa and I have been talking. We think it's really time for you to seriously consider assisted living. We found a place that takes Medicaid so it won't cost you anything. It's clean, safe, has nursing staff 24/7. We really think it's the best option. Kenneth, I don't want to go to a facility. I want to stay in my home. Dad, be reasonable. You're 75 years old. You have multiple health conditions. You can barely take care of yourself. What happens when you have another fall? When you have another emergency and no one is there to help? Then I guess I'll die. That's what you're waiting for anyway. Isn't it? For me to die so you don't have to deal with me anymore. That's not fair and you know it. We're trying to help you. You're trying to get rid of me, to put me somewhere out of sight so you can forget about me completely. Fine. Stay in your apartment. Break a hip, die alone, see if I care. I'm done trying to help someone who won't help himself. He hung up. We didn't speak for over a month after that. Then came February 2024. The month everything changed. The month my son decided that instead of dealing with his inconvenient elderly father, he would simply tell everyone I was dead. I didn't know he had done it, of course. I was just living my life, managing my health conditions, getting by with Mrs. Chen's help and my home health aide. I had no idea that my entire family thought I was dead. Kenneth didn't call, but that wasn't unusual. We often went weeks without speaking. I noticed he hadn't returned my last few calls, but I figured he was busy or mad about our last conversation. Then came that phone call from Ruth, crying and confused, telling me she had been grieving me for 3 weeks, that Kenneth had told her I died of a heart attack, had been cremated, that he was handling everything. After I calmed Ruth down and assured her I was very much alive, I called my brother Marcus. He answered and immediately burst into tears. Leon? Leon, is that really you? It's me, Marcus. I'm alive. I'm sitting in my apartment right now, alive and well. But Kenneth said, he called us. He said you died. We've been planning a memorial. I've been grieving you, brother. I thought you were gone. I went through the same conversation with Dorothy and James. All of them shocked, confused, grieving the loss of a brother who was still alive. All of them wondering why Kenneth would do such a thing. I knew why. I knew exactly why. Kenneth had decided that dealing with his aging father was too inconvenient, too much trouble. So he had simply erased me, told everyone I was dead so he wouldn't have to field questions about why he never visited me, why he wasn't helping me, why he was such a terrible son. If I was dead, he was free. Free from obligation, free from guilt, free from the burden of having an elderly father who needed help. I sat in my apartment after making those phone calls, and I felt something I had never felt before. Not just hurt or sadness, but rage. Pure, cold rage at what my son had done. He had killed me off like I was nothing. Had told my family I was dead so he could avoid his responsibilities. Had let my siblings grieve for 3 weeks while I sat alive and alone in my apartment, unaware of his betrayal. I called Kenneth's cell phone. It went straight to voicemail. I called his house phone. No answer. I called his office. His secretary said he was unavailable. Fine. If he wouldn't talk to me on the phone, I would go see him in person. I took the bus to his office building in Buckhead, a gleaming glass tower where his marketing firm occupied 3 floors. I rode the elevator to the 15th floor, walked past the receptionist who tried to stop me, and found Kenneth's office. He was sitting at his desk on his computer, looking successful and comfortable in his expensive suit in his corner office with a view of the city. When he saw me walk in, his face went completely white. "Dad? What are you? How did you? Surprised to see me, Kenneth? I guess you would be, since you told everyone I was dead." He stood up, came around his desk. "Dad, I can explain." "Explain what?" "How you told your aunt, your uncles, my siblings that I died. How you let them grieve for me for 3 weeks. How you faked my death, so you wouldn't have to deal with me anymore." "It wasn't like that. I needed space. I needed time to figure things out without everyone calling me constantly asking why I wasn't helping you more." "So you told them I was dead? That was your solution?" "I was going to tell them the truth eventually. I just needed some time without the pressure, without the guilt trips." I stared at my son, this man I had raised, this person I didn't recognize. "You let your family mourn me, Kenneth. You let them plan a memorial service. You put them through that pain just so you wouldn't have to answer uncomfortable questions about what a terrible son you are." "I'm not a terrible son. I just can't dedicate my entire life to taking care of you. I have a career, a family, responsibilities. I am your family. I am your father. The man who raised you alone after your mother abandoned you. The man who worked 2 jobs to put you through college. The man who sacrificed everything for you." People were gathering outside his office now, drawn by our raised voices. Kenneth's face flushed with embarrassment and anger. "Get out," he said quietly. "Get out of my office right now." "Gladly. I just wanted to see your face when you realized you had been caught. Wanted you to know that I know what you did. That everyone knows what kind of person you really are." I said, "Get out." He physically pushed me toward the door. I stumbled, caught myself with my cane. Security was coming now, alerted by his secretary. "I'm leaving," I said. "But this isn't over. You don't get to erase me from the world because taking care of your father is inconvenient." They escorted me out of the building. I rode the bus home, my hands shaking with anger and hurt, and when I got to my apartment, Mrs. Chun was waiting. "Mr. Washington, are you all right? You look terrible." I told her everything. About Kenneth telling my family I was dead, about the confrontation at his office, about everything. She listened with growing horror and outrage. "That is elder abuse," she said firmly. "What he did, that is abuse. You should call the police. Call a lawyer." "I don't have money for lawyers, Mrs. Chun." "Then we find someone who will help for free. There are organizations, legal aid societies. We will find help." Mrs. Chun was a force of nature when she decided to be. Within 2 days, she had connected me with a legal aid attorney named Patricia Monroe who specialized in elder abuse cases. Patricia was a black woman in her 50s, sharp-eyed and fierce, who listened to my story with growing anger. "Mr. Washington, what your son did constitutes several forms of elder abuse under Georgia law. He declared you dead to avoid his filial obligations. He's been neglecting your care needs. He physically pushed you at his office. We have multiple avenues for legal action. I don't want to sue my son. I just want him to acknowledge what he did, to face consequences. The consequences can take many forms. But first, we need to document everything. I want you to write down every instance of neglect, every conversation where he refused to help, every time you asked for assistance and he declined. We need dates, times, witnesses if possible." For the next week, I wrote page after page of memories, conversations, instances where Kenneth had failed me as a son. 23 years of neglect, condensed into a legal document that laid bare just how badly he had failed his father. Patricia also contacted my siblings, got their statements about what Kenneth had told them, documented the emotional distress his fake death announcement had caused. She contacted the home health agency to get records of how often I needed care and had no family support. She built a case that was devastating in its thoroughness. "Mr. Washington," she said when we met to review everything, "your son is in serious trouble. What he did is not just morally wrong, it's legally actionable. We can file criminal charges for elder abuse, we can sue for emotional distress, we can petition for financial restitution for the care you needed that he didn't provide. What will that accomplish? Will it make him care about me? No. Nothing can make him do that. But it will hold him accountable. It will force him to face what he did. And it will protect other elderly people from the same kind of abandonment, because cases like this set precedents." I thought about it for a long time. Thought about Kenneth as a little boy, crying for his mother. Thought about all the sacrifices I had made, all the love I had given. Thought about the man he had become despite all that love. "File the charges," I said. "He needs to face consequences." The charges were filed 2 weeks later. Kenneth was charged with elder neglect and filing a false death report. The news coverage was immediate and devastating for him. Marketing executive charged with declaring elderly father dead to avoid care responsibilities. The story went viral locally. Kenneth's face was all over the news, his comfortable life exposed for everyone to see. His company put him on administrative leave pending the outcome of the case. Melissa filed for divorce within a week, apparently deciding she didn't want to be married to someone publicly exposed as someone who would declare his own father dead. My phone started ringing constantly. Reporters wanting interviews, people from my old neighborhood reaching out in support, old co-workers from the post office calling to say they couldn't believe what Kenneth had done. But the most important calls came from my family. My siblings, who had been grieving me, were now fierce in their support. "Leon, we're coming to Atlanta," Ruth said. "All of us. We're going to be there for the trial, and we're going to make sure that boy knows what he did was wrong." And they did. Marcus flew in from Chicago, Dorothy from Detroit, James from Houston, Ruth from Memphis. They all came to Atlanta and they surrounded me with love and support I hadn't felt in decades. "Why didn't you tell us how bad things were with Kenneth?" Dorothy asked one evening when we were all having dinner at my apartment. "We would have helped. We would have been there for you." I was ashamed, I admitted. Ashamed that my own son wanted nothing to do with me. Ashamed that I had failed as a father somehow. You didn't fail, Marcus said firmly. Kenneth failed. You raised that boy right, gave him everything. What he became is on him, not on you. The trial was scheduled for 3 months later, in June 2024. In the meantime, my life changed in ways I never expected. My siblings didn't just visit for the trial. They reorganized their lives to make sure I was never alone again. Marcus, who was retired from his job as a high school principal in Chicago, decided to move to Atlanta. I've been thinking about relocating anyway, he said. Chicago winters are too much for my old bones. And you need family around you, Leon. He found an apartment in my building, 2 floors below mine. Suddenly I had my brother nearby, someone to have coffee with in the mornings, to watch baseball games with in the evenings, to just be there. Ruth, Dorothy, and James couldn't move, but they set up a rotation. One of them visited Atlanta every month, stayed for a week, helped me with doctor appointments and grocery shopping, and just provided company. For the first time in decades, I felt like I had a family again. Mrs. Chun was delighted. Your real family is here now, she said. Not that ungrateful son. These people who love you. The legal case moved forward. Patricia Monroe was relentless in building the prosecution's case. She documented every instance of Kenneth's neglect, every time I had asked for help and been denied, every medical emergency where he hadn't shown up. She also got statements from Kenneth's former colleagues and neighbors. Apparently, Kenneth had been telling people for over a year that dealing with his elderly father was such a burden, that he wished there was a way to just make the problem go away. One coworker testified that Kenneth had joked about pulling the plug on me if I ever ended up in a coma. The most damning evidence came from Kenneth's own records. Patricia subpoenaed his phone records and found that he had been researching how to declare someone legally dead and filing false death certificates in the weeks before he called my family to announce my death. He had planned it. It wasn't a spontaneous decision or a mental breakdown. He had researched how to fake my death, planned out his story, and executed it with cold precision. Melissa gave a deposition that was devastating for Kenneth. She testified that he had told her he was tired of dealing with the old man, and that it would be easier for everyone if he just wasn't around anymore. She said Kenneth had talked about declaring me dead as a way to free himself from the obligation without actually having to do anything illegal. Except it was illegal. Very illegal. The media coverage intensified as more details emerged. Think pieces were written about elder abuse in America, about how adult children abandon their aging parents, about the crisis of elderly people dying alone because their families can't be bothered. I was interviewed on local news. I just want people to understand, I said to the camera, my voice shaking with emotion, that when you have children you make a commitment, not just to raise them when they're young, but to love them always. I kept my commitment to my son. I loved him, supported him, sacrificed for him his entire life. He couldn't be bothered to visit me once a month. The interview went viral. Suddenly I was receiving letters and emails from elderly people all over the country who were going through similar situations with their adult children. Stories of neglect, abandonment, children who only called when they needed money, children who dumped their parents in nursing homes and never visited. You're giving voice to thousands of people, Patricia told me. People who thought they were alone in this. But the letters that affected me most were from the adult children, the ones who read my story and recognized themselves in Kenneth. They wrote about being too busy, too stressed, too overwhelmed with their own lives to make time for aging parents. They wrote about the guilt they felt, the rationalizations they made, the ways they avoided confronting their own failures. Some of them reached out to their parents after reading my story, made amends, started visiting more, rebuilt relationships they had let atrophy. That gave me some comfort, that maybe Kenneth's betrayal could lead to some good for other families. Kenneth hired an expensive lawyer, a man named Richard Caldwell who specialized in defending white-collar criminals. His strategy was to paint me as a demanding, manipulative father who had guilt Kenneth his entire life, who had used Kenneth's sense of obligation to control him. Mr. Washington weaponized his victimhood, Caldwell argued in pre-trial motions. He used his status as a single father, his sacrifices, his health problems as tools to emotionally manipulate his son. Kenneth Washington was simply trying to establish healthy boundaries with a parent who refused to respect them. The argument made me sick. I had asked for basic help, for occasional visits, for some acknowledgement that I existed. That was manipulation, but Patricia was ready for this strategy. The defense wants to make this about boundaries, she said in her response. But boundaries don't involve faking someone's death. Boundaries don't involve telling your entire family that your father died so they'll stop asking why you never visit him. That's not establishing boundaries. That's elder abuse. The trial began on June 10, 2024. The courthouse was packed. Media, elderly rights advocates, people from my old neighborhood, my siblings, Mrs. Chen, even some of my former co-workers from the post office. Kenneth sat at the defense table in an expensive suit, looking calm and composed. He didn't look at me, didn't acknowledge my presence. To him, I was still invisible, still just a problem to be solved. The prosecution presented their case over 3 days. Witness after witness testified about Kenneth's neglect, his refusal to help, his cold dismissal of my needs. Maria, my home health aide, testified about finding me after falls, about the times I had been sick and had no family support, about how I would talk about my son with such sadness in my eyes. Mr. Washington would say, "Maybe Kenneth will visit this week," Maria testified, crying. And then Kenneth wouldn't come, and I would see Mr. Washington's heart break a little more. This happened over and over. Mrs. Chun testified about the day I came home from confronting Kenneth at his office, about how I had sobbed in her apartment, about the years of watching me hope for phone calls that rarely came. "He is a good man," Mrs. Chun said firmly, pointing at me. "A kind, gentle man who deserved better from his son. What that man did," she pointed at Kenneth, "is unforgivable." My siblings testified, each of them describing the phone call from Kenneth announcing my death, the grief they felt, the memorial service they had begun planning. Ruth broke down on the stand, sobbing as she described the 3 weeks of believing her oldest brother was dead. "I mourned him," she said through tears. "I cried myself to sleep every night thinking about Leon being gone. And all that time he was alive. Kenneth put us through that pain deliberately, for his own convenience." The most powerful testimony came from a geriatric psychiatrist named Dr. Helen Okonkwo. Patricia had asked her to evaluate me and provide expert testimony about the psychological impact of Kenneth's actions. Mr. Washington suffers from severe depression and anxiety related to his son's abandonment, Dr. Okonkwo testified. The fake death announcement compounded this trauma significantly. When he learned that his son had told the family he was dead, it confirmed his deepest fear, that he was worthless, that he didn't matter, that his existence was such a burden that his own child would rather pretend he was dead than deal with him. She went on to explain that this kind of betrayal by an adult child causes psychological damage comparable to severe abuse. Mr. Washington spent 50 years loving and supporting his son. To have that child not just neglect him but actively erase him from the world is a profound violation of the parent-child bond. The trauma is immense. Kenneth's lawyer tried to argue that I was exaggerating my health problems, that I was more capable than I claimed, that I was trying to manipulate Kenneth into being a full-time caregiver. But Patricia destroyed that argument by presenting my medical records. Multiple falls requiring hospitalization, a stroke, panic attacks, depression, diabetes, high blood pressure, arthritis, pages and pages of documentation showing that I genuinely needed help, that I wasn't exaggerating or manipulating. Then came Kenneth's turn to testify. I watched my son take the stand, swear to tell the truth, and prepare to explain why he had declared his father dead. His lawyer led him through his testimony carefully. Kenneth talked about how demanding I was, how I always needed something, how the responsibility of caring for an elderly parent was overwhelming while he was trying to manage his career and raise his own children. I made a mistake, Kenneth said, his voice smooth and practiced. I was under tremendous stress. I felt like I was drowning in obligations. I couldn't handle the constant calls from my aunts and uncles asking why I wasn't doing more for my father. So I made a terrible decision. I told them he had died, thinking it would give me some breathing room to figure things out. And did you intend to correct this false information eventually? His lawyer asked. Absolutely. I was planning to tell them the truth after a few weeks, say there had been a mistake, that he had been very sick but recovered. I never intended for it to go this far. It was a lie. Everything about his testimony was a lie. But he delivered it so convincingly, with just the right amount of remorse and self-flagellation, that I could see some of the jurors looking sympathetic. Then Patricia stood up for cross-examination, and everything changed. Mr. Washington, you testified that you felt overwhelmed by obligations to your father. Can you tell the jury exactly what those obligations entailed? Well, the constant phone calls, the requests for help. Let me be more specific. In the year before you declared your father dead, how many times did you visit him? Kenneth hesitated. I'm not sure exactly. I have testimony from multiple witnesses that you visited your father exactly 3 times in 2023. 3 times in an entire year. Does that sound correct? It might be. My schedule was very busy. Your father lives 45 minutes from your home. He had multiple medical emergencies that year, including a hospitalization for a stroke and a panic attack. Did you visit him during either of those hospitalizations? I visited during the stroke. For 30 minutes. You visited for 30 minutes and spent most of that time on your phone. Is that correct? I had work obligations. Mr. Washington, you make over $200,000 a year. You have vacation time, sick leave, flexible work arrangements. Are you telling this jury that you couldn't take a few hours off to visit your father when he was hospitalized? Kenneth's composure started cracking. You don't understand how demanding my job is. I understand that you found time for a 2-week vacation in Hawaii that same year. I understand that you attended multiple concerts, sporting events, and social gatherings. You had time for those activities but not for your father. Isn't that true? That's different. Everyone needs relaxation. Your father needed his son. He needed help with basic tasks. He needed someone to care whether he lived or died. And you were too busy relaxing in Hawaii. Patricia pulled out phone records. Let's talk about those constant phone calls you mentioned. According to these records, your father called you 37 times in 2023. You answered 12 of those calls. The average duration of those calls was 4 minutes. Does that sound like he was constantly demanding your time? Kenneth couldn't answer. And let's discuss what your father was actually asking for. According to his testimony and corroborating witnesses, he asked you to visit once a month. 1 visit per month. Was that too demanding? It wasn't just visits. It was the guilt, the emotional manipulation. What manipulation? Can you give me one specific example of your father manipulating you? He would talk about how alone he was, how he raised me by himself. Those are facts, Mr. Washington. Your father did raise you alone after your mother abandoned the family. He did work 2 jobs to support you. He did sacrifice to put you through college. Stating facts is not manipulation. Or do you consider any reminder of your father's sacrifices to be manipulation? Kenneth's face was red now, angry. You don't understand what it's like having that kind of pressure. Pressure? Let's talk about pressure. Your father worked as a mail sorter and supervisor for 40 years. He raised you alone from age 5. He paid for your entire college education. He never remarried, never had another child, devoted his entire life to you. That's pressure, Mr. Washington. And he handled it without declaring you dead. The courtroom was silent except for a few muffled sobs from my siblings. Patricia continued, relentless. Let's discuss the phone calls you made to your family in February 2024. You called 4 different people, your Aunt Ruth, your Uncle Marcus, your Aunt Dorothy, and your Uncle James. Can you tell the jury what you told them? I told them my father had died. Be specific. What exactly did you say? Kenneth looked down. I said he had a massive heart attack and died in his sleep. And that he had been cremated? Yes. Why did you say he had been cremated? I don't know. I wasn't thinking clearly. You said he'd been cremated so no one would ask to see the body. Isn't that correct? So no one would want to have a viewing or a traditional funeral where the absence of a body would raise questions. I suppose that was part of my thinking. So you planned this carefully enough to think through those details, but you want this jury to believe it was a spontaneous decision made under stress? I made a mistake. You made multiple deliberate choices. You researched how to file false death reports. We have your browser history, Mr. Washington. You spent hours researching this before you made those calls. This wasn't a mistake. This was premeditated. Patricia presented the browser history, timestamp searches for how to fake someone's death, consequences of filing false death report, how long before someone is presumed dead. You researched this, Mr. Washington. You planned it. You executed it. And then you let your family grieve for 3 weeks while your father sat alive in his apartment, unaware that his entire family thought he was dead. Is that correct? Yes, Kenneth whispered. I'm sorry, the jury couldn't hear you. Is that correct? Yes, Kenneth shouted. Yes, I did it. I told them he was dead because I was tired of dealing with him. I was tired of the guilt, tired of the obligation, tired of having this old man be my responsibility. Are you happy now? I said it. The courtroom erupted. Kenneth's lawyer was trying to get him to stop talking, but Kenneth was done pretending, done with the careful testimony. He wouldn't go to a facility. He wouldn't make it easy. He just kept living in that apartment, needing help, needing attention, needing me to give a damn about him. And I didn't. I don't. I never wanted to be responsible for him. Your Honor, Patricia said calmly. I think we have our answer. Kenneth was removed from the stand, his lawyer looking like he wanted to strangle his client. The prosecution rested. The defense put on a weak case, trying to argue that Kenneth had suffered a mental breakdown, that the stress of his life had made him temporarily irrational. But Kenneth's own testimony had destroyed any sympathy the jury might have had. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they came back, the forewoman read the verdict with a firm voice. On the charge of elder neglect, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of filing a false death report, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of elder abuse, we find the defendant guilty. Kenneth showed no emotion, just sat there staring straight ahead. I felt my siblings around me, holding me, crying, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Vindication. Justice. The sentencing hearing was 2 weeks later. Patricia presented evidence of the harm Kenneth's actions had caused. My severe depression and anxiety, the trauma my siblings experienced, the the medical costs I had incurred with no family support. Judge Williams, a black woman in her 60s who had listened to every word of testimony with increasing anger, looked at Kenneth with contempt. Mr. Washington, I have been a judge for 23 years. I have seen many kinds of cruelty in this courtroom, but what you did to your father is among the cruelest acts I have witnessed. You didn't just neglect him. You didn't just abandon him. You erased him. You declared him dead to avoid the inconvenience of caring for him. Your father worked 2 jobs to raise you. He sacrificed his own happiness to give you opportunities. He loved you unconditionally, and you repaid that love by treating him as if he didn't exist, by telling his family he was dead, so you wouldn't have to answer uncomfortable questions about what a failure you are as a son. This court sentences you to 18 months in prison, to be followed by 5 years of probation. During your probation, you will be required to perform 500 hours of community service at elder care facilities, so perhaps you can learn what caring for elderly people actually entails. You will also pay restitution to your father in the amount of $50,000 to cover the care costs he incurred without family support. Furthermore, I am issuing a permanent restraining order. You are not to contact your father directly or indirectly for the remainder of his life unless he specifically requests contact. You have lost the privilege of being his son. Court is adjourned. Kenneth was taken into custody immediately. As they led him away in handcuffs, he looked at me for the first time since the trial began. I don't know what he expected to see. Maybe triumph, maybe satisfaction. But I just felt sad. Sad for the little boy who used to hug me and tell me I was the best daddy in the world. Sad for the relationship we never had. Sad that it had come to this. The media coverage of the sentencing was intense. Marketing executive sentenced to prison for declaring father dead was the headline everywhere. My story became a symbol of the elder abuse crisis in America, of adult children who abandon their parents, of the epidemic of loneliness among the elderly. I was invited to speak at conferences about elder rights, to share my story with advocacy groups, to help other elderly people understand they weren't alone. It was exhausting but also healing, turning my pain into something that could help others. My life changed dramatically after the trial. Marcus was living in my building, providing daily companionship and support. My siblings visited regularly, called weekly, made sure I knew I was loved and valued. Mrs. Chun remained my close friend and neighbor. But the biggest change was internal. For years, I had blamed myself for Kenneth's failure to love me, thought I must have done something wrong as a father. The trial and the verdict helped me understand that Kenneth's cruelty wasn't my fault. I had been a good father. Kenneth had made his own choices, become his own person, and that person happened to be someone without empathy or conscience. 6 months after the trial, I received a letter from Kenneth's prison. It was addressed to my lawyer, per the restraining order, asking if he could forward a message to me. The letter was 3 pages long, single-spaced, and it was the closest thing to an apology Kenneth had ever offered. Dad, I know I have no right to contact you, even through your lawyer. I know the restraining order exists for good reason, but I needed to write this even if you never read it. Prison has given me time to think about my life, my choices, who I became. The other inmates know why I'm here. It was all over the news. Do you know what child abusers and elder abusers rank in prison? Right at the bottom. I've been attacked twice, spat on, called names I won't repeat here. But the worst part isn't the physical abuse. It's the way the guards look at me, like I'm something disgusting. Like I'm less than human. One guard, an older black man named Williams, pulled me aside my first week here. I read about your case, he said. My father raised me alone too, after my mother died. He worked himself into the ground for me, and when he got old and sick, I took care of him, moved him into my house, helped him bathe, fed him, sat with him when he was dying. Because that's what you do for someone who loved you unconditionally. And you couldn't even visit yours once a month. He wasn't angry when he said it. He was just disappointed. Like he couldn't understand how someone could be that empty inside. And he's right. There is something empty inside me, Dad. Something that should be there but isn't. I don't know if I was born that way, or if Mom leaving broke something in me, or if growing up with money and privilege spoiled me. But whatever the reason, I am fundamentally damaged. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I declared you dead, Dad. I let Aunt Ruth and Uncle Marcus and Aunt Dorothy and Uncle James grieve for you while you were alive. I did that deliberately, with planning and forethought, because taking care of you was inconvenient. The therapist they make me see here says I have antisocial personality disorder. She says I lack empathy, that I view people as objects to be used rather than as human beings with feelings. She says it's treatable, but that I have to want to change. I don't know if I can change. I don't know if I even know how to be a real person, someone who actually cares about others. But I'm trying to at least understand what I did, why it was so wrong, why you deserved better. You were a good father. You loved me when Mom left. You worked 2 jobs and never complained. You put me through college. You were proud of me even when I treated you like garbage. You deserved a son who loved you back, who cared for you in your old age, who valued you as a person. Instead, you got me, and I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry for all of it. I won't contact you again. The restraining order is right and just. But I needed you to know that I understand now what I did. I understand that I took a good man who loved me unconditionally and I treated him as disposable. I understand that you deserved better. I hope you're happy now, Dad. I hope you have people around you who love you properly. I hope you spend your remaining years surrounded by warmth and care. All the things I should have given you but didn't. Kenneth. I read the letter 3 times, sitting at my kitchen table with Marcus beside me. When I was done, I put it down and looked at my brother. He says he understands, I said. But does he really? Or is this just more manipulation? Does it matter? Marcus asked gently. He's out of your life now. Whether he truly understands or is just saying what he thinks you want to hear, it doesn't change anything. You're free of him. He was right. Kenneth's understanding or lack thereof wasn't my concern anymore. I had spent 50 years trying to make him into someone he clearly wasn't capable of being. Now it was time to focus on myself, on the family who actually loved me, on living whatever years I had left in peace. I wrote 1 sentence in response, which my lawyer forwarded to Kenneth. I forgive you because carrying anger will only hurt me. But I don't want contact with you. Live your life, and let me live mine in peace. That was the last communication between us. Kenneth served his 18 months, was released on probation, and from what I heard through distant connections, moved to another state to start over. He lost his house in the divorce, lost his high-paying job, lost his reputation. Melissa got primary custody of the kids, and according to the divorce decree, Kenneth was only allowed supervised visitation. His life fell apart in ways I never intended but probably deserved. The news coverage had been so extensive that everywhere he went, people recognized him as that guy who declared his father dead. He couldn't escape what he'd done. But I tried not to think about him. Tried to focus on the good things in my life. My siblings, Mrs. Chan, the advocacy work I was doing, the younger people I was mentoring who came from backgrounds similar to mine. I started speaking at schools, telling young people about the importance of honoring your parents, of remembering where you came from, of understanding that success without character is just emptiness dressed up in expensive clothes. I raised my son with everything I had. I would tell high school students, I loved him, supported him, sacrificed for him. And when I got old and needed him, he couldn't be bothered. Don't be like him. Be better. Remember that your parents are people, not just resources to be used until they're no longer convenient. Some of the kids got it. Some didn't. But if even one person heard my story and decided to treat their parents better, then maybe Kenneth's betrayal had served some purpose. I turned 77 last month. My siblings threw me a big party in the community room of my apartment building. 40 people came, family, neighbors, friends from church, people from the advocacy organizations I work with. Mrs. Chun made her famous dumplings. Marcus made his specialty barbecue. Ruth baked a cake that said, "Happy birthday to the best big brother ever." I stood in that room surrounded by people who loved me, who valued me, who considered my existence a blessing rather than a burden, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Complete, unconditional love. Andrew and Sarah, my grandchildren, weren't there. They were teenagers now, living with their mother, and as far as I knew, they didn't even know what their father had done to me. Maybe Melissa had protected them from that knowledge, or maybe Kenneth had told them some sanitized version where he was the victim. It didn't matter. They were Kenneth's children, being raised by Kenneth and Melissa. They weren't my responsibility anymore, just as Kenneth wasn't my responsibility. I had my own family now, my siblings who visited and called and made sure I knew I mattered. Mrs. Chun, who checked on me daily and shared meals with me and treated me like the father she had lost years ago. The people I had met through advocacy work who became friends. The young people I mentored who called me Pops and asked for advice and actually listened. This was my family now. Chosen family, found family, the family you make when the family you're born with fails you. Last week I had another health scare. Chest pains in the middle of the night, and I was rushed to the hospital by ambulance. It turned out to be acid reflux, not a heart attack, but for a few hours I thought maybe this was it. Maybe I was really dying this time. And you know what I thought about as I lay in that hospital bed waiting for test results? I thought about how lucky I was, because within an hour of being admitted, Marcus was there holding my hand. Within 2 hours, Mrs. Chun had arrived with my favorite soup, telling the nurses exactly how I liked my pillows arranged. By morning, Ruth had gotten on a plane from Memphis and was sitting beside my bed, reading to me from the newspaper. I wasn't alone. Even if I had been dying, I wouldn't have died alone. That's what Kenneth never understood, that the love you give comes back to you, maybe not from the people you gave it to, but from somewhere. The universe balances out somehow. Kenneth gave nothing and ended up alone, imprisoned, divorced, ostracized, with nothing but his empty accomplishments and his hollow life. I gave everything and ended up surrounded by love, even after my own son betrayed me in the cruelest way possible. So which one of us really won? I'm 77 years old. My own son told everyone I was dead just to avoid taking care of me. He declared me deceased, let my family grieve, put them through unspeakable pain, all because being my son was too inconvenient for him. But I'm still here, still alive, still surrounded by love, still making a difference in people's lives. And Kenneth is somewhere else, living with the consequences of his cruelty, trying to figure out how to be a human being at 52 years old. I don't hate him, pity him, because he will never know what it feels like to be truly loved, to be surrounded by people who value you for who you are rather than what you can provide. He will never understand that the greatest wealth isn't money or status or success. It's being able to look around and see people who genuinely care whether you live or die. He threw that away. He had a father who loved him unconditionally, and he declared that father dead because love without obligation wasn't worth his time. But I'm still here, still living, still loving, still being loved. And that's the greatest revenge I could ever have, living well, surrounded by real family, while he lives with the knowledge of what he destroyed. If you liked my story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you in advance. And you, what would you do in this person's place? I would love to hear your opinion, so please share it with me in the comments. I'm always curious about what you all think, and also write me where you're listening from. For more life stories like this, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. There are many other stories waiting for you. Stories about betrayal, redemption, and the strength we find when we refuse to let cruelty define us. With heartfelt greetings until next time.